Hi, everyone. I'm here with Dr. Bernie Mayer of the Werner Institute. Bernie has been a researcher, a teacher, and a practitioner of conflict and negotiation for the past, he won't let me use a number of years. I'm very glad to have him here as a guest in this course. Bernie, most discussion of strategy and negotiation tends to focus on whether we're being competitive or collaborative. Very often many people tend to do their best just to avoid conflict and negotiation altogether. Can we talk some about that in a negotiation perspective?
Sure. It strikes me that almost every move we make in a negotiation involves making decisions about what we're going to engage with and what we're going to avoid. Uh-huh. And of course, the big decision is whether to enter into a negotiation at all. And I think it's very interesting how many people who I've talked to over the years, have taught negotiation or conflict over the years, really don't want to enter into something that they label as a negotiation because it feels like they're going to have to raise sticky issues or engage in a process that feels unpleasant in some ways. Of course, there are some people who just love that, but a lot of people don't.
So there's some avoidance in negotiation sometimes stems from a deeper avoidance of conflict or these kind of tough interactions in general.
Right. I think sometimes it's an avoidance of tough interactions where the parameters of what's appropriate or what isn't are difficult, where you don't quite know how far to push your own interests and accommodate others. But I also think sometimes it's about people are avoiding dealing with that part of themselves that they're uncomfortable with. You know, I find myself, if I really engage in a negotiation, I can get quite aggressive and assertive, and I don't like that often about myself. So that's just a decision to engage or avoid the interaction at all. But then as you go through a negotiation, almost every move you make, you have to decide, what issue are you going to raise? What are you not going to raise? How firm an offer are you willing to make? How firmly are you willing to reject somebody else's offer?
And that involves elements of avoidance, because if you raise one issue, you might be raising it at the expense or instead of raising another issue. So you're going forward, but you're also pulling back.
You're always every time you decide to raise one issue, you probably are avoiding another in some way or another. And so I think it's a constant interplay between engaging and avoiding. And just to complicate the picture a little bit, we actually avoid by engaging sometimes. So, for example, this is an example that I often think about. You and I working together, and I don't think you're doing your share of the work. And I avoid it. I work harder. I work to cover it up. But finally, I'm fed up.
By the way, is this a true story? Because I just want to know.
Not about you.
Well, okay, I was just interested if this
was anything the other way around. No, it's not about you.
Okay, let's check.
But I can think of people this has been true in the past.
Okay, yeah.
And I don't bring it up. I cover it up. I don't want to create any unpleasantness because, after all, we have to continue working together. Finally, I'm fed up.
Yeah.
So I go up to you and I say, God darn it, Noam, you haven't done your share of this thing from the get-go. I've done everything. This really pisses me off, and I'm not willing to deal with it anymore. Now, it might sound like I'm engaging the issue, but I'm raising it in a way that's going to shut you down.
Right. There's not going to be a negotiation about it afterwards. I might shut down. I might slap you in the face. I might walk out.
Right. It is what I call avoidance through escalation. And the other way we might avoid, it seems like engaging, is I might go up to you and say, so Noam, I know that there's been some tension between us about our division of work here, and I'm not comfortable with that. This is what I think is the problem. This is what I propose doing about it. How about we agree on this? So it sounds very problem-solving oriented, but I've right away put out a solution there. Yeah. So now we're focused on the solution.
And don't have to talk about it.
Don't have to talk about the problem. That often is a form of avoidance itself.
So, if I hear you correctly, if we have a natural orientation towards avoidance, sometimes this finds its way to the surface and just avoiding a situation altogether. But sometimes it will trickle through even after we've kind of mobilized ourselves and brought ourselves to the table, it will still come to the surface in the way we raise things, in the way we approach the table, in the way we approach the other, and we might find ourselves, acting as if we're engaging in a negotiation, but really we're just continuing in our old pattern.
That's right. But you can also say the reverse. Sometimes we act as if we're avoiding when we're really engaging in a passive-aggressive sort of way, for example. So I say, no, I don't want to deal with that. It's fine. It's just fine. It's no problem. It's fine. And really, I'm saying it is a problem, and it's not fine. And we all know this. Anybody who's ever raised adolescents knows this. Right. And it is, but we all do that sometimes. It's not like, these are people who do that are bad behavior.
No,
we've met the enemy and we are they, or something like that. We all do this. And so I think it's much more complicated than say you either engage or you avoid. Yeah. It is how do you really engage in an issue so you really want to deal with it, to talk about it, to see where you are each at with it, to open the door for a constructive interaction. And in order to do that, you have to figure out how to engage the issue and what to avoid.
Right. And once you start doing that more intentionally, as opposed to just our natural, let's either avoid altogether or duck and weave in order to avoid the really unpleasant stuff, we might actually get better at doing that and have those constructive interactions that good negotiations really are. I hope that's what this course is about in the end. So if you had to think as if you were giving advice to a great many people out there who may have either recently discovered or have always known about themselves that a lot of their own instinct and orientation or style is on this avoidance side of the spectrum. How can they work with themselves to make these choices more consciously, more intentionally? What should they learn what can they practice then?
Well, I think there's a couple of things we can do. And they are both what we do before a negotiation and after. Uh-huh. So one is to kind of be straight with ourselves about what our tendencies are. Yeah. That this is what I'm comfortable with, this is what I'm not comfortable with. To name it when we're avoiding something, or how. Or to name it when we're choosing to engaging, and how.
I'm going to engage now, even though I know this isn't natural to me or this doesn't come easily. Right. I'm up against something difficult now. Right. Engaging with X.
Right. So that's right. And the other thing I find personally, if I approach a negotiation or just a conflictual interaction with some trepidation, is to say, what am I really afraid of? That's sort of internal work. But what am I worried about? So I'm worried about losing a friendship or a relationship. I'm worried about the fact that they're going to come back at me and get really angry at me. I'm worried about the fact that I'm going to end up behaving in a way that I don't like. What is it I'm really worried about? Or just that I'm going to stir up emotions that I prefer not to stir up. What am I worried about? And the other thing just is to be really clear about why I'm doing this. What are my real hopes here and goals here? What's important to me to get? Because what tends to happen is when we open up the door in a negotiation, we finally do it, then we want to bring up everything.
Right.
And that's also actually a way of avoiding it.
But if we are doing this in a kind of in a limited and intentional way, knowing we're working against some perhaps natural instinct or ingrained habit, then being very clear to us on our motivations and our interests and our goals in this interaction will both help us come to the table and also help us come to the table constructively, as opposed to, bringing it all and just working out everything in our lives right here at this table, which is not the right table to work it out.
Right, I think that's right. And I also think it's very helpful to figure out, where are they coming from? Mm-hmm. From their point of view. Not in other words, not what we think about where they're coming from, but if they were to talk to a friend and say, this is where I'm coming from, what would they say? Mm-hmm. I think it's helpful to do that too. Not always very easy.
No, but we have this picture in our mind of if I know myself as a negotiation avoider, then I will probably have a kind of a flip image of the other in my mind. I know I don't like negotiations. I don't want to approach this. I would prefer to avoid it. I immediately picture the other person as someone who is competent, experienced, happy to be there and ready to take me for a roll. And that would it could be
they hate it,
that
could
other
probably
person.
hate it just as much as we
Well,
do.
it could very well be, but we don't build them up that way. So wonder about what's going on the other side.
The other thing that I actually find very useful as a general way of growing in this area, but also in preparation for the next edition of this negotiation, is to think back afterwards about what happened. Now, our first effort to think back tends to be justifying ourselves and everything we said and every reaction we had, and that's fine. I mean, I do that as much as the next person. But if we can get beyond it to say, right, what did we actually say? What did they actually say? What and why? What was going on for us when we said it? And it's not so much whether it's good or bad, but just what went on. Being a reflective practitioner as negotiators, really. What did we say? Why did we do it? What was the impact? What can we learn? What was our presumptions? Maybe where were our presumptions right or wrong? So, for example, I go into a negotiation. I think I'm going to raise an issue with you, and I'm going to be very forceful about it. And boom, you come unglued and chop my head off. I'm going to likely say, what a jerk. Why did he do this? But if I can get beyond that and say, what did I say? What was I thinking about it? What may have been wrong with what I was thinking about it? And that's helpful.
But it sounds to me as if it also involves this post situation reflecting, also involves some degree of celebrating. In other words, celebrating the fact that we considered it, the fact that we went into the room even though we know we didn't really want to, that we did raise the issue, even if we decide later that we raised it in the wrong way, but that we actually sat down and put an issue on the table and say, okay, so we brought it this much, right? And now we need to improve, we need to tweak it, but we got over the big hurdle of the big hurdle of avoidance. And now we need to deal with some of the ripples that we caused by doing it.
Right. And I actually think it's helpful to have somebody we can talk to about it.
Yeah.
Now, sometimes that talking is having a beer with friends and telling our story and having them reinforce whatever we did.
Yeah. Oh, you were great.
That was right. You really let them have it. Oh, boy, but they were really jerks. But if we can get beyond that and with where somebody can really talk through what happened, who helps us, it can be a mutual growth thing. I don't think this is just true about negotiation. I think it's true about almost everything we do in interpersonal ways in life. But it certainly is true about negotiation. Because one of the things about negotiation, it really is a basic life skill. It has so much to do with how successful we are in life in so many different arenas, from work to marriage to dealing with kids to dealing with the community, you name it. Yeah. And yet we don't really take very seriously growing in that area. And I think it is interesting because it is one of the most important predictors of how well we can do in life, that we can do the most about actually improving on. I can't maybe do much about the fact that I have a dour personality or whatever it might be, but I can become a better negotiator.
What a great point to end on, just saying, well, that's the rest of the course. Let's go out and do that.
Great.
Thank you, Bernie.
Thank you.